2, altering demographic composition in the occupied territories. 3, altering the character and status of the holy city of Al-Quds. 4, discriminatory measures. And 5, violation of the right of Palestinian people to permanent sovereignty over their natural resources. The prolonged occupation by Israeli occupying regime confirms its intention to make it permanent, in violation of the principle of prohibition of acquisition of the territory by force. The occupation of Palestinian territories is the longest military occupation existing today. The right to self-determination of Palestinian people continues to be violated as long as this occupation ages. This ongoing violation towards Palestinians' ability to rely on state-based rights and obligations under international law, depriving them of their inalienable right to self-determination, including the right to live in freedom, justice, and dignity.
Well, China's representative told judges at that court that Israel's practices severely undermine the rights of the Palestinian people.
Palestinian-Israeli conflict stems from Israel's prolonged occupation of Palestinian territory and Israel's long-standing oppression of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people fight against Israeli oppression and their struggle for completing establishment of an independent state on the occupied territory are essentially just actions for restoring their legitimate rights. The right to self-determination served as precise legal foundation for their struggle. Self-determination only applies to two scenarios, namely peoples under colonial domination or foreign occupation. Under no circumstances does the right to self-determination offer any basis for any part or group within the sovereign state to claim a so-called right to secession.
Well, let's discuss all of this with Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. Marwan, just a couple of hours ago, we were talking about the seeming growth of anti-Western sentiment. Do you think that as this conflict continues, we're going to see more and more of that in various fora?
Well, thankfully, there are outliers. We've heard earlier, some of the Western nations like Ireland, like Spain, like Belgium, are sort of, taking a different directions. The likes of France and others are changing a bit their position. So we see Norway. Yeah. So we see a certain change happening slowly, but surely. And I think as we enter, as we've entered the 5th month of war in Gaza, I think there's more and more pressure towards that, because let's all remember that the ICJ is looking at now two issues at the same time. Yeah. One is genocide in Gaza, and the other, the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories, the occupied Palestinian territories. So in a sense, you could say that Palestine is back center stage at the international arena. And I think the Western nation needs to start taking a position. And clearly, some of them, especially the ones led by the United States, are becoming ever more isolated.
Well, it was interesting to see that a large number of countries, especially today, came out and pushed back on the US submission that any kind of an advisory opinion from the court could affect peace negotiations. I mean, Jordan was very explicit and said there was legal precedent against that.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important observation, because you get the sense that without being mentioned, it's like as if America is the elephant in the room, right? And since Israel did not speak, Israel is absent, but its occupation is present in The Hague. And it seems like America is representing Israel in The Hague, right, as usual. But be that as it may, the arguments by several other countries, actually most of the 30 countries that we've heard at The Hague, are basically telling the United States, what the hell are you talking about? First of all, why should the legal opinion of the highest court of the land be any problem for resolving a conflict that's been going on for 75 years? for resolving an occupation, an illegal occupation, for resolving an aggression, for ending an aggression against the people. So in a sense, you could say that I think the way now increasingly Palestine is being viewed in the international public opinion, and increasingly in legal forms as such, and at the United Nations General Assembly, and in fact even by the majority of the United Nations Security Council, all come together to show us that Palestine is important, Palestine is indispensable, the occupation of Palestine must be resolved, otherwise we're going to be seeing more Gazas.
Well, what we will eventually hear from the court is potentially an advisory opinion to the UN General Assembly, right? It's non-binding. What does it matter?
I tell you, what matters on at least two important fronts. One, that one we just mentioned, the court of public opinion. I think it's important as the Palestinian cause gains more and more support, solidarity, activism, and so on and so forth around the world, as more and more social groups, pro-justice groups, anti-racism groups, all coalesce around the Palestinian questions. I think that eventually will start putting more and more pressures at governments, on governments. But I think more importantly is some of these things we've been hearing from the Irish notably, is the fact that once the court says this is an illegal occupation and it has ramifications, the likes of the European Union would have to take stricter measures in terms of economic and other cooperation with Israel.
So it could lead to further action. Marwan, before I let you go, I want to check, because if my calendar's right, it's been a month.
Yes.
And the ICJ has required Israel to report back on the other case that you mentioned in terms of whether or not genocide is taking place in Gaza. And Israel had to do a number of things and they needed to report back. That's coming up next week.
Yes, Monday, I think. And clearly, Israel has been doing almost the opposite of everything the ICJ has asked. We've heard, for example, yesterday that it's almost like, create a paper trail. So you would have some Israeli leader say, we mustn't do this and that, right? It's almost as if it's meant for the ICJ. But in fact, Israel in practice have done everything the opposite. I'm not sure if they will make any testimony next week, but certainly Israel is isolated in the ICJ, it's isolated in the UN Security Council, it's isolated in the international arena. Basically, the only one supporting the United States effectively today is the United States, but the United States is becoming more isolated in the international arena.
Yeah, interesting dynamics. Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera senior political analyst. Great to talk to you this news hour. Thanks for joining us. Well, still ahead here on Al Jazeera. Families in Democratic Republic of Congo say they're tired of running from one shelter to another while violence escalates between M23 fighters and government rebels. In the longest match in Qatar Open history, Andy Murray has now been knocked out of the tournament. More on that coming up shortly with Farah.
To think that Murray had won 8 matches.
Of Chinese asylum seekers are traveling to the US.
That's the ball.
Many take a dangerous route through Latin America.
A gang of people pointed a gun at me.
In the first of a two-part investigation, 101 East meets the Chinese migrants risking it all for the American dream on Al Jazeera.
This ship is home to survivors of last year's earthquakes in Turkey. A floating hotel, it features rooms, a dining hall, and entertainment facilities. Social workers offer lessons to residents still recovering from their ordeal. 45-year-old Gönül is scared of entering a building after the earthquake destroyed her home.
Luckily, we have the sea and we are living on a ship. We built a small world here. We are a family.
And eventually, they have something to look forward to.
This amusement park reopened, giving many here hope that life is at last returning to normal.
They are playing and laughing, but the trauma is never far away.